Welcome back. You are watching the Global Eye. Brazil voters are just days away from heading to the polls for a presidential election that has deepened divisions in the South American nation. The upcoming elections have been shrouded by an unprecedented climate of tension and violence. Right-wing incumbent Jair Bolsonaro is going up against his left-wing rival, former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Opinion polls have shown Bolsonaro lagging behind the former president. However, Bolsonaro has suggested that he may reject the results if he loses, and has also been making allegations that Brazil's voting systems were vulnerable to widespread fraud for months. Meanwhile, the U.S. Senate just recently passed a resolution backing a free election in Brazil and denouncing efforts to incite political violence and undermine the electoral process. Several other candidates are also seeking the presidency. If nobody wins, a second round of voting is scheduled for October 30th. Joining us now to discuss these elections is Guilherme, Professor Political Science, joining us from Sao Paulo. Guilherme, if I would ask you about the violence, tension that has been on in Brazil over this election, what is your sense? If voted out, will Bolsonaro go quietly?
Oh, thank you for having me. Bolsonaro will most definitely not go quietly, and that's what really concerns most Brazilians right now. He has repeatedly stated that he's not going to accept the election's results. He has summoned his supporters to take the streets in case Lula wins, because he refuses to accept the idea that Lula might win over him in these elections, since Lula is seen as a corrupt on his side by his supporters. So I think that this defeat is going to bring a lot of turmoil to the streets, at least for a couple of days or weeks after the election's results, in case Lula wins. And of course, we have to also consider that Bolsonaro is backed by both the security forces, the state-based security forces, and by the military. We don't know exactly how many military officials are totally loyal to Bolsonaro's authoritarian project or scheme, but this is also a matter of concern. We have citizens in Brazil who are armed as of now. Right. Brazil was a country with no much access to guns, and now, since 2018 until today, more than 700,000 Brazilians have had access to guns. So this is also another matter of concern in this very violent context that we are in.
Right. Give us a sense of the signs of a military coup in Brazil, or a sign that if Bolsonaro loses his election, he will subvert the election result.
I think a military coup, the likes of which we had in the past, is very unlikely to happen, because the military are not really united behind Bolsonaro right now. Or it's still uncertain whether his support among the military is that much high or that much significant to justify a coup. But what we can see, though, is a situation very similar to the one that we saw in the United States on January 6, 2021. Supporters of Bolsonaro trying to invade public buildings, trying to threaten Supreme Court ministers, justices. So I think that the scenario is more likely to be one of violence rather than one of full democratic breakdown. But yet, if there's violence in the streets, depending on how things unfold, that might really beat up our democracy right now. We have a very young democracy, by the way, in Brazil. It's a 40-year-old democracy, and I've never seen anything like that happening on the eve of elections.
Right. What are the reasons why Jair Bolsonaro is lagging behind in these polls? What's making him unpopular?
Well, Bolsonaro has run a very radicalized and rather incompetent administration. We have to consider, well, the economic figures are improving right now after the pandemic and in the context of the Ukraine-Russia war. So in one sense, there are some economic figures that are improving, but Bolsonaro has pretty much ignored many other issues so important to Brazilians, from healthcare. More than 680,000 people died from COVID-19 on his watch. Education, public security, some other figures in other areas of public policy have not improved consistently. Not to mention the fact that when it comes to the situation of the economy, even though the figures are improving, we still have more than 30 million Brazilians suffering from poverty. So this is also something that we have to consider. So Bolsonaro has stagnated at some 35% of voting intentions in recent polls, while Lula, who can capture that effective memory from the past, Lula ran a very successful government until 2010. So I think that also makes the difference when Bolsonaro and Lula get face to face. People remember of the good old times of the Lula administration very fondly, because the economy was doing better and Brazil was in a much better global position as well.
Right, and if Jair Bolsonaro, very quickly, we've run out of time, if Jair Bolsonaro continues to be in power by force, rejects the election result, EU, the US, they've already said that they may downgrade the relationship with Brazil. Is that a worry in the country at this juncture?
I think that not so many people are worried about the military coup per se. So that's the reason why we sort of assume that there will be no international backing to Bolsonaro's authoritarian scheme in case it happens. So I think that most governments around the world, they are just sitting back and waiting for the next administration to take office. And even though the possibility of an executive takeover or a breakdown is of concern, that's certainly not the priority of most governments abroad.
Right, we've run out of time, but Guilherme, Casarões, thank you so much for joining us here on Global Eye, giving us your view on the tense election in Brazil at this point. Let's get you the latest from Iran now. Protests over the death of a young woman, Mahsa Amini, continue even as security pushes back. Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi said her death has saddened all, but the government cannot allow the ongoing chaos disrupting peace in the society. Radhika Udas and Arundhati Ramnan report. Right, there have been a large number of casualties in Iran as a result of these protests as well, and many Iranian women taking to the streets to protest against the killing of Mahsa Amini. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.